first we have to talk about the big news. The second, it appears, assassination attempt against Donald Trump. This one taking place, as I'm sure you've heard by now, at his golf course in West Palm Beach. He was playing around Sunday, and around 1:30 in the afternoon, Secret Service saw a weapon, which turned out to be an AK-47 style weapon, poke through the bushes 400 or 500 yards away. The Secret Service saw that weapon. They fired. The suspect fled. He was caught. He had a court appearance this morning. I won't say his name because I don't like to give publicity to these kind of people. He's facing some preliminary charges right now: possession of a firearm while a convicted felon and possession of a firearm with an obliterated serial number. So he made his court appearance today. An interesting detail came out today that according to the charging document, cell phone data says this guy may have been lying in wait for nearly 12 hours, CNN reporting, before he stuck the weapon through the fencing or the shrubs around the golf course and was fired at by Secret Service. So that's an interesting detail. That's possible. It looks like this guy didn't just show up there an hour before. And it's also interesting because from what I understand, this was a last-minute change in President Trump's plans to go to this golf course that happened during that day or maybe the day before. So we're still waiting for a lot to come out. I don't like to make any, firm conclusions when we have so little information. But based on the initial reports of this guy's social media, it looks like he was a very anti-Trump guy. He was very supportive of the war in Ukraine. We'll find out more. He lived in North Carolina most of his life, recently moved to Hawaii. And we'll talk about that in a second. But in terms of security, clearly we've got an issue with the Secret Service. I mean, that was obviously apparent in the shooting in Pennsylvania. There's investigations ongoing about that. This one handled obviously much better. The Secret Service was on it right away. It appears this guy didn't even get a shot off, unlike the shooter in Pennsylvania. So I'm not saying they're identical circumstances. I will say, however, though, if you've ever been around a golf course or played golf, you know that on the perimeter, this is typically what happens. You have some fencing, you have usually trees, bushes, shrubs, so people aren't just standing there, watching. It gives some privacy for the course. It seems crazy to me that the Secret Service, knowing that 9 weeks ago you had an attempt on Trump's life, you wouldn't scan the perimeter of that as it's going on before he plays, just making sure nobody is hiding out here. I'm sure they will be doing that going forward. Why wasn't that done here? Who knows? I mean, the sheriff who spoke at a press conference yesterday basically said, well, the Secret Service wouldn't do that because they don't have the funding, they don't have the personnel because Donald Trump isn't the current president, he's a former president. And Joe Biden today, the current president, said he thinks the Secret Service, and I'm paraphrasing here, needs more funding and Congress should give it more funding, I guess, to hire more people to deal with this kind of thing. Now, I agree that's probably true. I guess my question would be, why haven't we done this before? And I think these two now assassination attempts are opening our eyes to maybe how unprepared, underfunded, inept the Secret Service has been for a long time. And that's beyond a Trump or a Biden issue or a Kamala Harris issue, because for whatever your political stripe, obviously we have to make sure that the people running for president are protected to the highest level possible. And thank God that, as with the first attempt, this attempt was unsuccessful and that President Trump is okay. Now, getting into the political rhetoric. That is the hot topic today. Everybody, right and left, is talking about rhetoric and how rhetoric leads to these kinds of things. And it appears, again, I say appears because let's wait and see till all the facts come out, but it looks like this guy was someone who was involved in anti-Trump rhetoric in recent years. I think it's such a complicated and interesting thing because both sides do engage in over-the-top rhetoric. And when it comes to the talk about Trump being a dictator, especially being like Hitler, a Nazi, like that kind of stuff, and I'm not saying that the Biden-Harris campaign is doing that, but clearly that kind of stuff is out of bounds. And that kind of political talk could trigger somebody who's already out there to maybe do something they otherwise wouldn't do. And I think that happens on both the right and the left, where these people who are maybe mentally unstable, they get into the echo chamber of social media, they see these things, and that feeds into their paranoia and their anger. I'm not saying that was the case with this guy, although it looks like it might be, but I'm saying just in general, politicians, commentators, journalists, anybody who's doing political commentary. I put myself in that category, even with our little show here that, is a small flea in terms of the size of its impact. But all of us need to just watch what we say and try to be as factual as we can. So I think the Hitler stuff obviously is out of bounds. The dictator stuff is out of bounds too, even though Trump did say to Sean Hannity, I'll be a dictator on day one. I think if you watch that, he was making a joke, talking about maybe executive orders he would make on day one. Hannity gave him a chance actually in that town hall to clarify. Hannity was like kind of laughing, like, you don't really mean you're going to be a dictator, right? And Trump didn't really clarify it, but I think he was making a joke. And the bloodbath thing is another comment. Charlie and I have talked about this before. He was clearly talking about the auto industry. That was what he was saying. He wasn't saying bloodbath as in a violent mob. So I think that in those instances, I think that the Harris campaign and Democrats should not be using that kind of rhetoric and pointing to those things. Now, here's where I disagree, though, with the conservatives that have pointed out in the last few days that people call Trump a threat to democracy. Look, I think that's just fundamentally true. When you try to overturn an election, and that's what he did, folks. I know there's been this rewriting of history, but he worked for months with a cabal of people, Rudy Giuliani and others, many of whom are facing criminal charges now. They worked for months to do everything they could to undermine an election, fake electors, pressuring local election officials, calling the Secretary of State of Georgia, find me 11,000 votes, pressuring Mike Pence not to certify the results, coming up with crazy conspiracy theories about voting machines changing votes, about people voting illegally, which did not happen in large numbers at all. In fact, here we are, 4 years later, and we have found no proof of widespread fraud, none. In fact, very little proof of any election irregularities at all, which is amazing considering over 150 million people voted. But yet, that conspiracy theory with Trump, you heard him at the debate, he continues to believe it. And then I haven't even mentioned yet January 6th, which I know he says he told them to go peacefully and patriotically to the Capitol. He also tweeted in the lead up to that, come to Washington, D.C. on January 6th. It's going to be wild. And it was wild. And so I think whether he intended for what happened to happen or not, I don't think he probably did. But he incited it. He's morally responsible for it. He brought those people there on that day for a specific reason after riling people up for months with conspiracy theories about the election and trying to overturn the results. So when you have that fact set, I think it is not only legitimate to say this guy's a threat to democracy, I think it's true. And I think to not say it or to deny it would be dishonest. Dick Cheney, hardly a liberal, this longtime conservative, said it in his statement the other day when he endorsed Kamala Harris. He said, this man, I'm paraphrasing, Trump, can never be trusted with power again. So many of the people who used to work for him, his former chief of staff, his former defense secretary, his former national security advisor, his former vice president, Mike Pence, either have said they will not vote for him or have specifically said on the record that the man is unfit, in large part because he tried to overturn an election. So that guy clearly is a threat to democracy. Now, what that threat will be, how severe it may be, that is open to interpretation. But the signs are there. So I don't think it's fair to lump that into the same category as saying he's a fascist or a dictator or Adolf Hitler. I think that is a fair distinction. Also, remember, a lot of the uptick in this awful political rhetoric, some of it does come from the left, but a lot of it comes from Trump himself and his people. I mean, remember, he did say that immigrants were poisoning the blood of America. I mean, that's pretty hateful rhetoric, okay? So this idea that Trump is just some innocent victim of irrational, hateful rhetoric from the left is crazy. Even in the last few weeks, the situation in Springfield, Ohio, which I'm sure you've heard about by now, is a town of roughly 60,000 people, a rural town in Ohio, and they have around 10, 15,000 Haitian immigrants there working and living in that community. And it has caused all kinds of problems. A lot of the Haitians don't know the driving laws. They speak a different language. It's driving up costs for rent and home prices. There's medical care issues with not having enough doctors and medical staff to treat this new influx of people, the schools, the burden there. There are lots of legitimate issues there. And the governor of Ohio has pleaded for help from the federal government. Mike DeWine, he's talked about that. That is a totally legitimate thing to talk about. But how has it been talked about in the context of Donald Trump and, to a large extent, J.D. Vance's running mate? They're eating the cats and dogs. I mean, that was the line from the debate. They've made memes about it. They've made songs about it on social media, remixes with Trump saying multiple times they're stealing the pets, the cats and the dogs, and eating them. There's no evidence of that. In fact, officials have come out and said there's nothing to support that. It started as a rumor on Facebook. Somebody posted it. They heard like their neighbor's daughter's friend say that this happened. But that's how it began. And Trump amplifies it in front of tens of millions of people at a debate. J.D. Vance posts about it on social media, then essentially admits that it may not be true, but he's glad he's doing it anyway. He is doing it anyway because it gets the message out. It's completely irresponsible. It's borderline racist. And look what's happened in that town. You have had threats, bomb threats, at the end of the week on government buildings. They had to shut down some government buildings. You've had universities in that area that have been targeted with bomb threats. Now, luckily, there haven't been any attacks, but the threats are specifically made by people who are pointing to the impact of these Haitians. And by the way, these Haitian immigrants, they are not people who are here illegally. They are in the country legally. They are working. The reason they're in Springfield, Ohio, it's not a coincidence. It's because that area made a conscious effort years ago. They had all this land. They had all these factories. They wanted to revitalize their economy, and they knew they needed workers. And so they made a plan to bring in foreign workers to help with their economy and get these factories up and running. And it turned out it worked too well. It worked spectacularly well. And you had these Haitian immigrants here legally on a temporary status that are there to work. They're fleeing a country, a homeland that's been overrun by gang violence. If you've seen in the news lately, it's a disaster what's happening in Haiti. So you have these people who are here legally, fleeing violence, working. And yes, it is causing problems in the community because it's a big influx of people in a rural area. It should have been managed better. They should have had, the Biden administration, more resources in that community. I'm sure nobody thought this many people would move there this quickly. But these are the immigrants that the Republicans should be praising, right? If you want to crack down on illegal immigration, I'm with you, totally. But we should be looking at it as a symbol of how to do it the right way. When people come here to flee violence on a temporary legal status, they're working, they're contributing to the local economy, but they're being demonized. And this is why, even though I have been, and Charlie and I have talked about this before, we have been very hard on the Biden administration for their immigration policies. Finally, getting it under control here in the last few months, dropping the rates of border encounters by over 50%, which was obviously done in part for political reasons. When Biden thought he was running himself, he wanted to reframe the issue. Harris now picking up the mantle. So there's no question politics is at play. And I think it's a fair question to say, why the hell didn't you do this 2 years ago or 3 years ago? That is absolutely fair. The border was chaos. Our immigration laws are a disaster. By the way, we need congressional action. We need bills and legislation passed, not just executive action. We need to make these things permanent. What Biden is doing now is being challenged in court. Whatever Trump is going to do, ultimately, if he's elected, that's going to be challenged in court. We need to have a bill in Congress to reform our asylum laws, to reform our legal and illegal immigration, to reform the legal immigration system and crack down on illegal immigration. And that has to be done through an act of Congress, which the Biden administration and congressional Democrats and Republicans came together with a bill. And of course, we know that Trump killed it. So my point is, I don't support largely what Biden and Harris have done on the border, but Trump killing that bill, which even the border union supported, which would have dramatically reformed our asylum laws, would have made it so much better. 6 months maximum. Now people wait years, which is one of the biggest problems of why so many people are in this country illegally. They know they can claim asylum and wait for a hearing for years that they're likely to lose in the long run. That, killing that bill, and also the way that they're demonizing these Haitians and immigrants, is why I can't get totally on board with Trump either. And it made me think of a speech that I had heard about before, but I had never listened to. And it was Ronald Reagan. This was in January of 1989. So this was at the very end of his presidency. His term ended a few days later. In fact, he said, this was during a Medal of Honor ceremony, I believe. And he was talking about how this would be one of the final speeches he would give as president. In fact, I think it was the final speech right before his term ended. And you want to see how far the Republican Party and how much it has changed. And again, I agree with cracking down on illegal immigration. I want to be clear on that. But this is what President Reagan said about immigration during this speech. He said, "This, I believe, is one of the most important sources of American greatness. We lead the world because, unique among nations, we draw our people, our strength from every country and every corner of the world. And by doing so, we continuously renew and enrich our nation. While other countries cling to the stale past, here in America, we breathe life into dreams. We create the future, and the world follows us into tomorrow. Thanks to each wave of new arrivals to this land of opportunity, we're a nation forever young, forever bursting with energy and new ideas, and always on the cutting edge, always leading the world to the next frontier. This quality is vital to our future as a nation. If we ever close the door to new Americans, our leadership in the world would soon be lost." And then he concluded by saying, "It is bold men and women yearning for freedom and opportunity who leave their homelands and come to a new country to start their lives over. They believe in the American dream, and over they make it come true for themselves, for their children, and for others. They give more than they receive. They labor and succeed, and often they are entrepreneurs. But their greatest contribution is more than economic, because they understand in a special way how glorious it is to be an American. They renew our pride and gratitude in the United States of America, the greatest, freest nation in the world, the last best hope of man on earth." I mean, first of all, holy shit. Like, why do politicians not talk like that anymore? I mean, could you imagine Donald Trump giving that speech? Or even Joe Biden, but especially Trump. That is just, it gives you goosebumps. I encourage everyone, go Google this. Go to here on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube, and just type in Ronald Reagan farewell immigration speech 1989. And you can see, because he delivers it, obviously, and even, he's known as the great communicator. He delivers it. I don't even do it justice. But it is just, I mean, it gave me goosebumps. It is inspiring. It is about what America is and what it represents. And anybody who knows immigrants, like, I live out here in California. I know a lot of first-generation immigrants. When I went to college, I knew a lot of kids who, they were born in America, but their parents were first-generation immigrants. And by and large, I mean, these people love America. They come here to work and to succeed, and oftentimes they're some of our best citizens. And these Haitian migrants, again, here in America, legally fleeing a terrible situation, to come to the United States, as Ronald Reagan says, the greatest, freest nation in the world, the last best hope of man on earth. You want to see how the Republican Party has fallen? Contrast that speech from Ronald Reagan to Donald Trump on the debate last week, saying, without any evidence, that these Haitian immigrants, again, here legally, are eating the cats, eating the dogs of people in Springfield, Illinois. It just, I can't, and again, I agree that we need to crack down on illegal immigration, of course. And the Biden administration has largely failed on that account, and it's a totally legitimate thing to point out. But when does Donald Trump ever make that distinction that I'm against illegal immigration, but talk like this, like Reagan did, about legal immigrants, and how important it is to America, and how it has been our comparative and remains our comparative advantage against the rest of the world, because people want to be here. And they are willing to spend their life savings. They're willing to risk their lives to get here. What we need to do, clearly, is to crack down on the illegal ways and expand the legal opportunities to get here. That's what we need to do. But clearly, from the rhetoric of Trump and a lot of his supporters, that's not what they want to do. They want to do the crackdown part on illegal immigrants, but they don't really want a lot of legal immigrants coming here. Very few numbers, maybe some doctors and lawyers. Trump talks about occasionally the high-achieving people that go to college here coming here and staying here, which I agree with, actually. I think that's very smart that we should do that. People who come here and get educated here in America should be allowed to stay here to work. But you never see him making specific proposals for that. It's always about demonizing, for the most part, immigrants that are here in this country. And I just think that Reagan speech, man, it's brilliant. It really is. It really shows you the change in the Republican Party in just, 35 years. I encourage everyone to go check it out. All right, last thing I wanted to talk about today, after I get a little water here. The latest polling, we'll see if this assassination attempt on Trump yesterday has any change bearing in the polling. I feel even we're kind of talking about it as it relates to the race. But look, we're 50 days out, and everything matters. And this is taking the news cycle, and will, I'm sure, for the next several days. Rightly so, by the way. This should be a massive story about this guy's background, what his plot was, what his motivations were. Unlike the previous shooter, we actually have this guy alive. That's huge. And also what the Secret Service needs to learn from this, how they can be better in the future. That obviously has to be addressed. But there is a political impact potentially, although I doubt it will be much. And we've seen enough in the polling now to know that Harris is gaining ground since the debate, which makes sense. I mean, she wiped the floor with Trump in that debate. It was a clear and obvious victory for Harris, so much so that Trump is saying he's not going to do another debate. Yeah, although he did give himself some wiggle room the other day. He said if his mood changes, he might do it. I think the only thing that will convince him to do it is if he's really behind in the polls and he knows he has to hit a home run. He has to really do something to change the nature of the race. I don't think we're there yet, but we might get there. So here's Real Clear Politics. These are the polls they have in their database that were taken entirely after the debate. So the debate was last Tuesday. So just polling from Wednesday through the weekend. Here are the results. Here are the margins. Morning Consult, Harris +5. Data for Progress, Harris +4. Tip, Harris +4. Yahoo, Harris +4. ABC News Ipsos, Harris +4. Although I think that one actually is +6 when you do likely voters. I think it's +4 among registered voters, but when you screen for likely voters, it goes up to Harris +6. And then you have one outlier, Atlas Intel, which has Trump by 3. So again, post-debate polls, here are the margins. Harris +5, Harris +4, Harris +4, Harris +4, Harris +4, Trump +3. So post-debate average, they don't have that in Real Clear Politics, but Nate Silver on the Silver Bulletin had the other day, the post-debate average was Harris over 3. Harris by 3 or 3.5. The overall average for Nate Silver was Harris 2.2. And on Real Clear Politics, it's Harris 1.7. So that obviously factors in a lot of polling that happened before the debate. But if this trend continues, and we'll see, then Harris is going to have a lead of 3-4 points by the end of this coming week. Maybe more. We'll see what the polling is coming out of this week. That would get her in the range where you would feel pretty confident she could win the Electoral College if that polling is accurate and she's up 3, 4, 5 points. Now, is that enough for Trump to say, oh man, I may need to do another debate? I don't know. I don't know if he wants to risk that or not. He probably has a couple more weeks to decide. I mean, look, there comes a point where you get to maybe mid-October where it's probably too late to put a debate together. So if it's going to happen, it probably has to be decided sometime between now and the first part of October. I don't think it will happen. The betting markets have it about a 75% chance there won't be a second debate. I think that's probably about right. I think that it's very unlikely that there will be. I think the only chance is if Trump sees he's in really, really bad shape and these post-debate numbers for Harris hold up. There was also some state-level polling in the last few days that's been pretty good for Harris in states you wouldn't expect. There was a poll in Iowa by Ann Seltzer, who's a really well-known, well-regarded pollster in Iowa. She always polls before the Iowa caucuses, and that's kind of like the gold standard polling for the Iowa caucuses each cycle on the Democrat and Republican side. She had Harris by down only 4 in Iowa, which Iowa's become a very red state. It used to be a very competitive state, but like Ohio, another Midwestern state that used to be competitive, now has swung really solidly for Trump. So Harris only being down 4, there's a really good sign. And there was a poll in Alaska where Harris was only down 4 or 5 from the other day. And that, again, a really bullish sign for her if she is doing that well in red states, making those at least somewhat competitive, although I certainly don't expect her to win either of those states. That syncs with a national polling trend where she is gaining. So we'll see if it continues. Who knows? Things could reverse. It could be a sugar high. People have short memories, short attention spans. But clearly that dominant debate performance by Harris is showing up in the polling right now. Also in the betting odds, it's roughly 52-47 if you go to electionbettingodds.com. Harris 52%, Trump 47%. That is pretty much where it has been since the debate. Prior to the debate, it was reversed. It was roughly 52-47 Trump. After the debate, a swing to Harris of about 8 to 10%. She went up 52-47. It stayed in that general range ever since. So about a week now. So I think that just shows you that we are heading toward a place. I don't think we're quite there yet. We need more polling to come out this week, and I'm sure a lot will, both state and national. We're heading toward a place where you can start to say Harris is the favorite slightly. But the slightly is key, because although she is a big favorite now, I think, to win the popular vote, I would be shocked if she doesn't win the popular vote. We know that that's not going to be enough. She's going to have to win the popular vote probably by at least 2 points, maybe 3 or 4 to win the Electoral College. Because in the 7 battleground states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, Nevada, all of them, in Nate Silver's average, are within 2 points. And most of them are closer than that. Most of them are within 1 point one way or the other, which shows you the states that matter, it is still exceptionally close. And one thing to remember about the states is it's possible if it's close, they break the 7 toss-up states where one candidate wins 4, one candidate wins 3. But what usually happens is they break the same way. I mean, look at those states in 2020. All 7 of those broke for Biden, with the exception of North Carolina. North Carolina, Trump won by a point, roughly. Biden won the other 6. But some of those margins were so tight. We're talking about a point or less in Wisconsin, in Arizona, in Georgia. I mean, incredibly tight. But breaking in one direction or the other. And that's usually how these things work. 2016, most of these close states broke for Trump, albeit by small margins. And remember, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, the blue wall, those 3 states have voted the same way in every presidential election since 1992. 7 of those 8 elections, they've all voted for the Democrat, and 1 time they all voted Republican. That was 2016. One other quick note on the polling. I thought this was interesting because Charlie and I have talked before about kind of how polling has been, how close it's been in recent elections. So one thing that I like that Real Clear Politics does is they give you the average on this day in 2016 and 2020. So we're about 6 weeks out. As I said, their average today is Harris 1.7, but that's going to go up because of this post-debate polling. That's going to go up probably closer to 3 here by the end of the week, maybe more. But just to give you a snapshot in time, in 2016, it's September 16th, the polling average on Real Clear Politics was Clinton 1.5, plus 1.5 over Trump. The final margin that year was Clinton by 2. So I know polling, gets a bad rap by some people. The Alan Lichtman, we've talked about him before with his model. The people like that, they say, polling doesn't matter. It's not accurate. It won't tell you who's going to win. I would just say 6 weeks out in 2016, the polling average was basically spot on for what the final result would be. Now, I'll be interested to see how 16 changes because you did have the Access Hollywood tape then in October, I think it was. You also had in October James Comey coming out and saying he was going to investigate Clinton for emails. That made a big difference. But as of September 16th of that year, the polling was pretty damn accurate to what the final result would be. And really, even the same thing in 2020 when you had COVID. I remember September of 2020. COVID's raging. People are dying by the thousands. We were months away from a vaccine. Schools and businesses were still largely shut down. I mean, the world was kind of in chaos. So it was tough to poll. But September 16, 2020, Biden was ahead by 5.9 in the Real Clear Politics average. He won by 4.5. So even that year, the polling 6 weeks out was 1.5 points off from what the final result would be. Now, if you're Trump, you look at that and you say, hey, it moved 1.5 points toward me. If that happens again and it moves 1.5 points this year, I'll win, which is true. But I think it shows you that polling overall, there are years where it's not as good as others, absolutely. But overall, tends to be fairly accurate, and it gives you kind of, especially if you aggregate the polling. Don't just look at one random poll. Like this Atlas Intel poll I mentioned has Trump by 3, right? Every other poll has Harris by 4 or 5. So one of two things is true. Either that's an outlier, or, which I think is probably true, or it's actually closer to the right result. And then probably what will happen if it is other polling will come in this week that will show similar things, and the polling will actually shift back to Trump, which is entirely possible. But I just think that historical perspective is good to keep in mind. All right, that's all I got for today. Charlie and I will be back later this week. We'll do a long form live show, hopefully some night this week. Talk about all, because I expect a lot of major organizations will come in with polling here this week, and we'll probably get a lot of state polling too. So we'll see what effect any of that has. But make sure you hit the subscribe button. Check us out. We appreciate you watching on YouTube and following the podcast as well. Thanks so much as everybody settle down.